I'm Carl King, and this is the Carl King Podcast, where every week, except for last week, we learn about music, filmmaking, and the other creative arts. To support this podcast, head over to patreon.com/carlking and join for just $1 or $5 per month. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. Special thank you to my Illusionist $51 level patrons, both Hank Howard III and Chadwa B. Quick shout out to my music endorsements, Vienna Symphonic Library, Fractal Audio, Ernie Ball Strings, Tune Track, and Millennia Media. And now, let's get this episode beginned. We've got 3 quick Carl King the Human updates, and then we will get officially beginned. First of all, I caught a pretty bad virus the day I recorded my last episode, and I spent about 10 days in bed, and that is why there was no show last week. And second, I have been refocusing my focus to music. My goal for 2023 is to improve my knowledge of the guitar fretboard. As a person who plays guitar, it's always been easier for me to play by ear or even by shapes. And although I have a lot of theory knowledge and can read and write music, those two worlds are difficult to merge in my mind. I can write the music I want to write and physically play the music I want to play. But I don't like the feeling of being lost or not knowing what note names I'm playing. I want to know them instantly without having to think about it. So at night, when I go to sleep, I close my eyes and imagine the guitar fretboard. I pick various groupings of strings and frets and run through the note names, sometimes at random. I might focus on just one string, moving up and down in pitch, or just one fret and move across all of the strings. I might also move diagonally across the frets or use different fingering positions. And the cool thing is, this visualization can be done anywhere without even having a guitar in your hands. And third, I'd like to share 2 tweets from Dr. Andrew Huberman, the host of the Huberman Lab Podcast. Now, I no longer have a Twitter account, but I had to go to his profile and find these in order to share them. And I think they are appropriate for starting a new year. The first one is, quote, "I've never observed anyone, regardless of field, achieve lasting prominence while voicing rancor or focusing much on the failings of others. Create and share, support others and enjoy. Givers and creators always prevail." And the second one, which is my favorite, quote, "If you're focusing on how someone else is failing, what's wrong with X, Y, or Z, you're wasting valuable neural real estate, building less, creating less, and slipping backwards. That's the slow lane. We all have limited forebrain resources. Use them wisely." And now let's use those forebrain resources wisely with this week's analytical filmmaking analysis. This week, for our analytical filmmaking analysis, we have Nope from 2022, directed and screenwrited by Jordan Peele. And I rank this as my number 6 film of 2022, even though I actually watched it mostly in 2023. Let's start with the visual storytelling. This film has lots of no dialogue scenes. And that's convenient because the main character, OJ, played by Daniel Kaluuya, doesn't talk much. But he is joined by and contrasted with 2 people who talk nonstop. In my opinion, Daniel Kaluuya's best scenes are when he is staring into the distance, seemingly doing nothing. But he is focusing and thinking, and he's good at that. One of the earliest scenes, 6 minutes in, when he's in the ER with his father, we have another example of no talking. No doctor came in to explain to the audience. There's no spoken exposition. We just see the X-ray, the close-ups, and the nickel. For a full minute, The information we need is communicated entirely visually. Regarding the music, I was so immersed in this film that I rarely noticed the score. But there was one scene that jumped out at me, and this was when objects fell from the sky outside the house. Composer Michael Abels used aggressive staccato stabs in the low strings, a sound I enjoy, and you can hear that in the cue called Blood Rain. Now let's look at the timing and the structure. Aside from the teaser, it isn't until about 26 minutes in that we get the first indication that something is up. Their horse, named Ghost, is outside in the middle of the night. How did it get out there? Was it left out? We don't know yet. So up until then, we're getting invested in the people as if this is a straight-up drama about life. So we've gone 26 minutes watching a human story that has pretty much nothing to do with the fantasy action plot that will soon unfold. And at that point, it starts to become Close Encounters-like. My only other strong observation about the structure of this film is that in Act 3, it becomes plot-driven rather than mystery and character-driven. The team is in place, the plan comes together, it turns into sort of a football game of kill the monster. I personally lose a lot of interest once there is a strong plot, but that's only my subjective opinion. About the screenwriting and editing, I'm not sure what this is called, maybe a sort of macrocosm and microcosm, but the story of Gordy the chimp mirrors the bigger story. It's a symbolic show within a show. I wonder how much those Gordy scenes were scripted in this exact way versus found in the edit. And that's a question I would ask Jordan Peele, and he would probably answer, "Get out of my backyard." There was a solid scene button, I think, at the end of Act 2, when the three of them are staring out of the door looking at the cloud. And OJ says, "What if it's not a ship?" It's a strong choice to end a scene or act with a question. And that question helps to tell us what we need to know without straight up telling us. Let's talk about the cinematography. There's one scene that caught my attention. It's when OJ is running away from the flying saucer, and the camera is pointed up at him with the sky behind him. And because of that, there's no parallax, meaning the background, which is the sky, is too far away, so there's very little motion. You can't tell he's moving. It's as if he's running on a treadmill. So they could have added some sort of particles or atmospheric layer closer above him to indicate that he's moving. But then again, it also creates the uncomfortable effect that although he's running, he's actually getting nowhere, maybe as if there's nowhere to hide. Now, regarding the theme of this film, I was thinking about what kind of monster or predator only eats you if you look at it. And I think the answer is social media. Maybe it can only suck you in and hurt you if you keep looking at it. And here's a minor technical detail. There's a scene where the praying mantis hangs down in front of the security camera, but the problem is cameras like that can't focus that close, right against the lens. That's a super close macro shot. And one last puzzling detail. Why did that TMZ motorcyclist have the chrome helmet with a single eye hole? We don't know yet, but hopefully, if there's a sequel, it will be all about him. I gave this film 5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd, and it fell just short of getting a little heart, because I might be reserving the little heart for films with a heavy dose of surrealism. And that said, I did feel actual fear during that scene in the barn where the little green men show up. But there's no actual fear button to click on Letterboxd to indicate that. This week's analytical musical analysis of the week is Mr. Bungle's The Holy Filament from their 1999 album, California. And this one was requested by Kyle MacLeod, my loyal Patreon subscriber. Oh boy. Folks, I am way out of my league here. I have basically zero experience listening to, playing, or writing this sort of jazz. It's just never been my thing. I don't know the albums, the artists, or the history, and my auditory system isn't able to process it. Chords with more than 3 notes, I'm lost. Honestly, to me, jazz chords sound like a warm fart in the shower. So after my initial analysis, I sent this off to Dale Turner for his help, and you will hear his input throughout. I also emailed Trevor Dunn himself, who wrote this song, but he notoriously doesn't listen to his old material, much less remember it. He did tell me he thinks he wrote this song on guitar, which I find kind of baffling, and that if I follow up with him in a couple of months, he'll have access to his original notes and would try to explain the chords to me at that time. In the meantime, I did my best to transcribe this jazz chord nightmare from the original album. So if there's something that theoretically makes 0 sense or is straight up not the correct notes from the song, it's probably my fault. And by the way, I'm only going to cover what I consider the verse in this episode, because that's plenty. And with that in mind, here we go. Regarding the key of this song, I would say this verse is roughly centered around B-flat major, which is a good choice of key. It begins with a B-flat major chord, works its way through some mysterious jazzy stuff, and it ends with what could be a B-flat major-ish chord. Regarding the tempo, even though the Holy Filament doesn't seem to have been recorded to a click, there are 2 obvious choices of tempo for this song, either 60 or 120 BPM. And I decided on 120, because at 60, those piano arpeggios would be written as 16th notes, and that just seemed outrageous. So let's start working through these jazzy chords. Chord number 1. Now what I'll call the verse begins at measure 7 with a B-flat major piano arpeggio. And the bass is playing B-flat, the root of the chord. But don't get used to that. We get 4 measures of a B-flat arpeggio, and then the vocals come in with a pickup note before measure 11. Now let's talk about what the vocals are doing here. I think there are multiple layers of vocals happening, but for the purpose of my analysis, I'm only going to highlight what I consider the main melody note. And you're welcome to dig deeper on the vocal overdubs as extra credit. So we have Mike Patton hitting the note F, which is the 5th of that B-flat major chord. And then he goes up to C, which is up a perfect 5th interval. And that C is not in the B-flat major triad. Now remember, the notes of a B-flat major chord are B-flat, D, and F, which means C is the 9th. That's right, Mike Patton is singing a 9th scale degree, which is not an unusual scale degree for him to sing, because that guy is big on singing non-chord tones. And then that melody walks down from C to B natural, B flat, and A. And those would be the scale degrees 2, flat 2, 1, and the major 7, which is a dissonant chromatic thing to do. And notice that only one of those notes is in the B flat major chord, and that would be the B flat note itself. That said, the chord underneath is pretty consonant. Chord number 2, Patton lands on an A flat over this chord, which is a D flat 7 sharp 9, also known as a Hendrix chord. The notes of that chord played here are D flat on the bass, and then F, C flat, E, and F on the piano. And those scale degrees would be 1, 3, flat 7, and sharp 9. Now, I want to point something out here. This melody and chord change is very similar to the Star Trek original theme. It's in the same key, and it uses some of the same notes and root movement. And it's a fitting coincidence for a song that is about the divinity of technology. Over that D flat 7 sharp 9, Mike Patton sings the notes A flat to G flat, which are the scale degrees 5 and 4, or 5 and 11. And as you can hear, that D flat 7 sharp 9 is a tense chord with many clashing notes. So chord number 1 was consonant, and now chord number 2 is dissonant. Chord number 3. In measure 15, the melody lands on an F note, and this next chord is a B flat over E flat, or B flat / E flat. That's a B flat major chord in the piano and an E flat note in the bass, with the notes B flat, D, and F. Those are the scale degrees 1, 3, and 5, and an E flat in the bass way down below it. Now, what the heck is going on there? Because E flat is not a note in a B flat major chord, and that E flat is a fifth down from the root of B flat, which creates this big open sound. And E flat is the fourth or 11th of B flat. And we'll see several examples of this, which I assumed was Trevor dropping the bass note down a fifth, playing the 11th of the chord. However, Dale Turner explains that this implies the sound of and functions as an E flat major 9 no third. So in that implied chord, we would call the E flat the root and analyze the rest of the notes in relation to that E flat. So those notes would be E flat, B flat, D, and F. And those scale degrees are 1, 5, 7, and 9. And notice it is missing the third or the G. About this stuff, Dale Turner says, quote, "Slash chords such as these are a standard jazz fusion or smooth jazz deal using either incomplete extended chords with no third, or in other similar instances, E flat over F, which would be F9 sus4, or G flat over A flat, which would be A flat 9 sus4, incomplete extended chords containing suspensions." And I can slowly do the math to follow that, but it takes me all afternoon. So for my own simple understanding, I'm going to call this type of chord Trevor trick number 1. And that means dropping down a fifth from the root of the chord and playing an 11th in the bass. And I'll point out each time Trevor uses his fancy Trevor trick number 1. But that is not to suggest that Trevor actually thought that way when he was composing it. It's just something I notice. By the way, the very first chord of Van Halen's Jump is this same type of chord. It's a major chord with a bass note a fifth interval down. And in that song, it would be a G over C, like this. That's a G major chord in the right hand and a C note in the left. Moving on to measure 18, over that same B flat / E flat, Patton sings the notes C, F, A flat, and C, which are the notes of an F minor triad. So now between the piano and voice, we have the notes B flat, D, F, A flat, and C. Those are the scale degrees 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and 9. And that creates a further extended chord between the piano and voice, a 5-note chord, which is a B flat 9. And that's acceptable. Now notice that the B flat over E flat, or B flat 9 over E flat, is a consonant chord. So now we've had consonant, dissonant, and back to consonant again. At measure 19, we get a distinct chord that fans of Bernard Herrmann will recognize. The vocals land on a B note over the piano and bass playing the notes C, E flat, G, and B. That's right, it's a C minor major 7. And you might also remember that type of chord from the Mr. Bungle song Travolta. Also, this C minor major 7 is in root position, meaning the C, a non-dissonant note, is being played by the bass. And notice that several of the other chords so far have been slash chords or inversions where a tension note was in the bass, creating an unresolved sound. Well, a C minor major 7 is a tense enough chord as it is, so there's no need to put a tense note in the bass for this one. And over that same chord in measure 20, we get another pattern arpeggio with the notes G, C, E flat, and G. And those all still fit over the chord, which is that C minor major 7. So now we have consonant, dissonant, consonant, and dissonant. Back and forth. It's tension and resolution. So what do you think will come next? Chord number 5, in measure 21, the vocals land on the note F sharp. And along with the piano, that is a B minor 9 chord with the notes B, D, F sharp, A, and C sharp. Those scale degrees would be 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, and 9. And look, we have an E in the bass, which is yet again a 5th down from the root of B minor 9, playing an 11th. And that's Trevor trick number 1 again. Now, according to Dale Turner, this would imply or function as an E13 sus4, which would be the notes E, A, B, D, F sharp, and C sharp, or the scale degrees 1, 4, 5, flat 7, 9, and 13. Now this is a somewhat dark chord coming from that previous chord, but by itself, it's a pretty consonant chord. I think if you heard it somewhere else, you'd just consider it a nice jazzy Mr. Rogers chord. So in my opinion, this does follow the pattern of consonant, dissonant, consonant, dissonant, consonant. So what do we have next? Chord number 6 at measure 23, Patton sings a G note. And the piano plays the notes C sharp, D sharp, G, and the bass plays an A. So altogether, that makes for an A7 sharp 11 chord, with the notes A, C sharp, D sharp, and G, or the scale degrees would be 1, 3, sharp 11, and flat 7. And that one is in root position and missing the 5th, which would have been E. So there's another 11 used in this chord. It's just not in the bass this time, which would have been Trevor trick number 1. Now the measure right after that, measure 24, the vocals descend chromatically over that same chord, which is always a dissonant sound. Those notes are G, F sharp, F, and E. And those scale degrees would be flat 7, 6, flat 6, and 5. I'd say that's a pretty tense chord. Notice that it actually has two tritones in it, between the A and D sharp, and between the C sharp and G. And so far, we have followed that same pattern of tension and release, back and forth, every other chord. For chord number 7, at measure 25, we get another very dissonant chord. The piano and vocals play a D sharp minor 7 flat 5, also known as a D sharp half diminished 7th chord. And those are the notes D sharp, F sharp, A, and C sharp. Those scale degrees would be 1, flat 3, flat 5, and flat 7. The point is, it's a very dissonant sound. And Dale Turner says that since there's an A on the bottom of this chord, it would imply or function as an A13 sharp 11 with these notes: A, C sharp, D sharp, and F sharp. That's 1, 3, sharp 11, and 13. Dale adds that, quote, "These notes imply A13 sharp 11 specifically because the chord in the previous bar had an A in the bass, and that chord was A7 sharp 11, so nothing's yanked our ears away from that tonal flavor." And Patton sings the flat 7 right out of the gate in bar 23, a note which never really gets undone. And at the end of measure 26, Patton sings a C sharp, which is also in that chord, leading down to the C in the next measure. So we have two dissonant chords in a row, which, if you look closer, is really just an extension of the same chord, from A7 sharp 11 to A13 sharp 11. We're on to chord number 8, but before we move on, there's a nutty detail here that I want to point out at the end of measure 26 and the beginning of measure 27. On the word machines, Mike Patton sings the notes C sharp to C natural, and the bass is playing the notes G to G flat. So that means those outer voices are moving in a parallel tritone. Now for measure 27, we have a G flat major 7 sharp 11. And the notes in the piano are B flat, D flat, and F, which would be a B flat minor chord by itself. However, Trevor is playing a G flat down in the bass, which transforms the overall chord into a G flat major 7. Those would be the notes G flat, B flat, D flat, and F, or scale degrees 1, 3, 5, and major 7. And that C note that Mike Patton is singing way up top becomes the sharp 11, which is a magical Lydian sort of sharp 4 thing. And notice that Patton is singing that very tense note, which is a tritone above the bass. And that is a difficult interval to sing for most people. Now, there are some vocal overdubs added at this point, and in measure 28, I can hear Mike Patton jumping up to a B flat, which is the third of the chord. With chord number 9, at measure 29, Mike Patton lands on an A note. And with an F in the bass and the other notes in the piano, we have an F9. Those notes would be F, A, C, E flat, and G, or scale degrees 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and 9. And that's a relatively consonant chord with that nice major third on top. With chord number 10, in measure 31, the piano and vocals create an E flat minor chord with the notes E flat, G flat, and B flat. Scale degrees 1, 3, and 5. And here we have that Trevor trick number 1, where he throws in an A flat in the bass. Once again, a fifth interval down from the root, making this an E flat minor over A flat, that A flat being the 11th again. But according to Dale Turner, these notes would imply and function as A flat 9, no third. And those notes would be A flat, E flat, G flat, and B flat. Those are scale degrees 1, 5, flat 7, and 9. Moving on to chord number 11, in measure 33, we have our final chord of this section, and the vocals land on an F note. And the piano is playing the notes A, C, and E, 3, 5, and major 7. And I might be going against the rules, but I like to call out which 7 it is, even if saying major 7 is redundant. But those notes do create a consonant, pretty F major 7 chord. And here we have Trevor trick number 1 yet again, where he plays a B flat in the bass, a fifth interval down from F, which would be the 11th. It's a nice open interval, making it a F major 7 over B flat. According to Dale Turner, this would imply or function as B flat major 9, sharp 11, no third, with the notes B flat, F, A, C, and E. Those would be scale degrees 1, 5, major 7, 9, and sharp 11. Now, one last thing I want to mention here. There are some unusual vocal harmonies happening in these last few measures. Trevor told me himself that Patton added those, and they never bothered to figure out what they were theory-wise. So that final note might not only be an F. It sounds crunchy to me, as if Patton is singing both an E and an F with overdubs, or possibly some other interval. And you are welcome to figure that out for yourself. Now, following this whole verse section, there's the creepy instrumental interlude, which is very dissonant, and it was introduced briefly at the very beginning of the song. But hey, this is as far as I'm going, so maybe someday I'll cover it in a part 2. Now let's sum up this verse. What did we learn? Well, number 1, Trevor is often playing a bass note that is a fifth interval down from the root, which would be an 11th. And that opens up the chord and creates a floating tonality. And I referred to this as Trevor trick number 1. Number 2, overall, this is Trevor Dunn serving up a spacey smooth jazz to metal kids. And actually, that is Trevor trick number 2. Because you could probably go back to the 70s and play this on a piano in a Holiday Inn, and no one would know the difference. I bet you didn't know you like smooth jazz. And number 3, from chord to chord, there is an alternating pattern of tension and release. It's a pretty chord, followed by an ugly chord, followed by a pretty chord, and on and on. And this mostly adheres to that. Thanks again to Dale Turner for his theoretical help and his big ears. So please check out his site, intimateaudio.com. And thank you to Kyle MacLeod, my Patreon subscriber who requested this song. And someone, please remind me to never analyze jazz music again. Okay, that's the end of this episode of the Carl King Podcast. Remember to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere else you listen to these dang podcasts. And support the creation of more episodes by joining my Patreon for $1 or $5 a month. That's patreon.com/Carl King. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. And as always, special thanks to my $51 a month patrons at the special illusionist level, Chubode and Hank Howard III. And thank you to all of the very good friends of Carl King for listening. And as I always say, Okay then, I will let everyone know